again, Tim? So good to see you all in person. So I want to start this Josh by asking you forgiveness. This Josh is very personal, and I come before you in humility, authenticity, and vulnerability. So what a strange time we find ourselves in now and for the last 2.5 years. Unlike any other, a time when all was shut down, we isolated from each other, and we re-emerged to devastating climate crisis, belief polarization, the growing threat to our democracy, and in the words of the President of the UN last week, colossal global dysfunction. Many of us are feeling profound pessimism, doomerism, and the loss of the dream of a bright future. For me, personally, my body has mirrored these breakdowns. I've been dealing with a progressive autoimmune illness for over 30 years. It has its quiet times and it has its active times. About every 10 years or so, it raises its head and progresses a little bit more. I've done a course of chemotherapy 4 times to shut down my immune system and stop the progression. This has always been successful until about 2 years ago, when my arms and hands began to weaken despite undergoing chemotherapy. I lost the ability to drive at the exact same moment that we moved into COVID isolation and were instructed to stay home. As COVID was raging in my work as a nurse practitioner, for our patients and our own safety, we learned to do most of our work through telemedicine. Just as my body was forcing me to cut back on activities, and I felt weirdly in alignment with global circumstances. At times it is daunting for me to avoid profound pessimism and doomerism. Charles Eisenstein, the author of The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, he's absolutely amazing, describes this time as our current crisis of sense, meaning, and identity. For me personally, as I face the risk of increasing disability, I too am faced with a crisis of sense, meaning, and identity. Rabbi David shared with us about his own personal journey with the tshuva process while sitting at Chesapeake Bay, inspired by the water surrounding him on all sides, doing his tikkun hanefesh, going through his life and finding who needed to be asked forgiveness and trying to make right his past wrongs, starting from when he was just a little boy. I had a similar and different experience. A few weeks ago, I spent 5 days in the silence of Grouse Gap at 7,000 feet, below the peak of Mount Ashland, facing the peak of Mount Shasta. Beautiful, beautiful place. My children got married there. Listening to the sounds of the wind blowing through the trees, the hawks, the swallows, the blue jays, the ravens, the flies, the crickets, the yellow jackets, and the occasional lilting voices of the PCT hikers. Watching the busy activity of the squirrels, the chipmunks, the butterflies, the resplendent variety of wildflowers, I meditated. So much vibrant life surrounding me. This to me was deep tefillah, deep prayer, feeling at one with God, while at the same time holding the emotions that arise for me from my personal loss as my disease progresses, as well as the global losses, the threat to our planet, as evidenced in the burnt forest and the smoke wafting in from nearby fires. How can we find meaning in loss? In God's seemingly random acts of cruelty, as well as the miraculous beauty that we can find everywhere we look. We can start by going within. It turns out that meditation is a traditional Jewish practice. When we look inward and nourish our souls, we can then move from that place of wholeness outwards to our world. The 18th century mystic Rabbi Nachman of Breslov believed that one who does not meditate cannot attain wisdom. He introduced the practice of hitbodedut, going out into the forest to meditate and talk to God, usually at midnight. When we find our place in nature, we feel nurtured by our mother, grounded in her solace, quieted from activity and quieting the mind from thoughts. This healing practice benefits us and in turn our earth. Rabbi Ellen Bernstein, the founder of Shomrei Adamah, the Guardians of the Earth, the first national Jewish environmental organization, and a wonderful, wonderful person who cares so deeply about our planet. She teaches and advocates about the role that religions, and particularly Judaism, can play in response to the environmental predicament. She says, "I believe that the beauty of the world can speak across political and religious divisions and call us to care and to act, because in the end, we will only save what we love." James Gustav Speth, the founder of the World Resources Institute, said, "I used to think that the top global environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address these problems. I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation." As Rabbi Avraham Joshua Heschel said, "Humankind will not perish for want of information, but for want of appreciation." Right? We now have new psychiatric diagnoses of eco-grief and eco-anxiety, which express feelings of dread, despair, fear, hopelessness, helplessness, rage, and other painful feelings that arise as we unpack the severity of the ecological crisis. Sinking into despair over the state of our environment sometimes feels unavoidable. But climate scientist Michael Mann warns, climate doomerism can be harmful because it robs us of agency, the agency we still have in determining our future. In my personal parallel situation, there are times when I cannot avoid that sinking feeling of doom, usually in the early morning hours, which can hold paralyzing fear. Journaling is helpful. I wrote, "Terror takes hold at 3 a.m. deep in the pit of the belly, snuffing out the embers of the sweet fires of passion, squeezing fiercely until the gratitude, the hope, the beauty, the denial struggle for breath, gasping for air. Terror reigns at 3 a.m. Doubts fly through the mind. Worst case scenarios play out with vigor and cruelty. Ugly visions mock the soul. Grandbaby's future blackens in despair as the dog sleeps blissfully unaware at my feet. 3 a.m. the truth prevails in exhausted sleeplessness. Grace and equanimity lie shattered in heavy, unrelenting sorrow. There is no comfort from the icy grip of terror." At 3 a.m., I question the deeper meaning of life. I ponder the role of suffering and my ability to not only overcome, but live fully despite the increasing physical challenges I face in my daily life. I am inspired by Reb Reuven ben Chaim Yosef, Ram Dass, who lived his last 20 years debilitated by a stroke. Despite his limited mobility and difficulty speaking, he nevertheless continued to teach and was able to look forward with hopefulness and good humor. Seeing all of his life as a blessing, he talked of being stroked by God. Suffering is the curriculum for becoming more conscious, he said. Life is a journey of awakening, and suffering is grist for the mill. I found a beautiful teaching from Rabbi Aviva Richman, the director of the Hadar Institute in New York. She teaches the concept of integrative theology, which she illuminated after what she describes as her devastating experience of pregnancy loss. She says, we should learn to accept and acknowledge death, learn to hold it within us as we hold life. When we are overwhelmed by loss, rather than bury it out of sight, we can be challenged and comforted to know part of what it means to actualize our divine potential, our Tselem Elohim, is to participate in the divine work of holding death alongside the life that remains. We say, Ein od milvado, there is nothing but God. And we just said, Yotzer or uberei choshech, God creates light and creates darkness. It's all God. In Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the ancestors, Rabbi Tarfon said, Hayom katzar v'hamalacha merubah. The day is short and the work is plentiful. Each one of us is responsible for bringing more light, more compassion, more loving kindness into the world, and transforming the suffering and the pain we see around us, the apathy and the greed, into meaning and action. Tshuva comes from the word lashuv, to return. And we say in the Aleinu, V'hashivota el levavecha, return to your heart. Return to your heart. When I feel consumed by feelings of loss, fear, hopelessness, returning to love elevates my soul and gives my life meaning. I mean, these babies. Spending time with my beloved family, my dear friends, my community, the trees, the birds, the beautiful mountains, listening to the language of the wind as I savor the velvet breeze on my skin, feeling the divine essence within and without me, this brings me sustenance and hope. And the truth is, when we say, Mi yichyeh umi yamut, who will live and who will die, none of us really knows. All we can know is that every one of us will face mortality at some point. Do we want to leave this world with clenched fists? Or at peace, with hands open in gratitude and acceptance, knowing that it is all God and it is all perfect? Frederick Buechner, the Presbyterian minister and prolific writer, and if you haven't read his stuff, he's amazing. He died last month at the age of 96. And he said, Frederick Buechner, Buechner, listen to your life. See it for the fathomless mystery that it is, in the boredom and the pain of it, no less than the excitement and the gladness. Touch, taste, smell your way to the holy and hidden heart of it, because in the last analysis, all moments are key moments, and life itself is grace. Shana Tova.